We are 1 week post the Alex DeBrincat trade. The Ottawa Senators continue to make their push for a playoff berth next season. What do they still need to do to get there? Ross Levitan of Locked On Senators joins us to talk about that and all things Senators next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can now hear us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. It's great to bring in a familiar face to Locked On NHL viewers and a familiar voice for listeners, Ross Levitan of Locked On Senators. And it has certainly been an eventful offseason for the Ottawa Senators, Ross. Let's start off with a basic question. Are you happy with the overall moves this team has made so far?
I think to say yes, I'll need to rewind back to the trade deadline because Ottawa made that huge splash for Jacob Chychrun, but only got 12 games out of him before the injury, and then Thomas Chabot went down. So I think in terms of the entirety, if you include the new look defensive core that hasn't had a chance to all play together yet, then I am happy. But when it comes to losing DeBrincat, you can't be happy when you're giving up the best player in any trade, especially one where you're trading within the division with a 25-year-old who had a down year, by his standards. But I think everyone's expecting Alex DeBrincat to get back to an above 30, maybe even back to being a 40-goal scorer next year. So that was a tough trade. There's no question. We broke it down in kind of in bits and pieces on Locked On Senators last week, so people can go check out that immediate reaction from last Monday morning. But yeah, they addressed the goaltending. That was a big thing. They got Joonas Korpisalo in on a 5-year deal that is either going to be a home run or it's going to be a ground out. There's no in between, it feels like, where he's either going to exceed expectations based on the AAV, or maybe you're going to then look at it in a year or two and he hasn't, and you're like, wow, that's a long contract to sign. So they took a swing. I appreciate it. Korpisalo had a great season last year, both in Columbus and in LA. And in the DeBrincat trade in particular, I mean, you get back a middle six forward, which they needed, in Dominic Kubalik. You get that first-round pick. I wish it was Detroit's for sure, rather than Steve Yzerman getting to pick the lower of the two. But to answer your question, I think this team is much more balanced than it was last year. They had the great top six, even with Josh Norris injured quick early last season. But now it's a more balanced team. Are they better? We'll have to wait till October till they drop the puck.
You talked about giving up the best player in the DeBrincat trade. Do you think the Senators got enough in return?
I think they had their hands tied. I'm not trying to be an apologist for the team here. I think that the real mistake was not doing their due diligence before acquiring DeBrincat, that they think if you really break it down, because now Ottawa is a cap team, and I'm still trying to rack my brain as the host of Locked On Senators about how the cap even matters, because since we've hosted this show, the Senators have been near the floor every single year. It hasn't mattered what moves to make to get you close to the top and how to maneuver your cap. But now with Tim Stuetzle's extension kicking in next year, Brady's in the third year of his $8 million deal, and Josh Norris, they have all these guys making $8 million or more. Now it matters. I have no idea how Pierre Dorion, the Ottawa Senators management, thought they were going to add to Brinkat's, well, it ends up being 7.8985. Let's be clear. The Sens were offering more than that on a long-term contract. It sounded like 8x8 was the offer, if it even got to an offer stage, because it might have been just, hey, are you interested in staying here long-term? No, actually, I'm not. Let's work on a trade instead. So I just don't know how they got it in their minds that this was a good idea. Or if you thought, you're like, hey, this is going to be a 2-year thing, then just sign him to his qualifying offer and run it back. But in terms of the situation that they found themselves in, I think it's okay. I mean, funny enough, Kubalik and DeBrincat actually scored the same amount of even strength 5-on-5 goals last year. But again, it was a down year for Alex DeBrincat. He hit a ton of posts, just didn't really always look comfortable, and also was playing with a 21-year-old rookie in Shane Pinto because of the injury to Josh Norris that I mentioned. So yeah, I think the return, it's a bit underwhelming, but when you put it in the perspective of, hey, if he was only going to sign an extension with Detroit, they had all the leverage in the world and they used it. But when you look at it from the point that Ottawa only gave up draft picks to get him, you can feel a little bit better about that if you are a Sens fan.
You talked about Norris. Do you think he's ready to start the season? Is he 100% ready to go?
Yeah, sounds like we actually had Pierre Doria on our show about 2 weeks ago, and he said that he's been skating for 3-4 weeks now. So that's the make or break, because as I said, they're more balanced this way. And Norris didn't play last year. He scored 1 goal. He played, I think it was 7 or 8 games total. You could realistically hope that Norris's goal production replaces what Alex DeBrincat put up last year. And that's where then everyone else kind of falls in place beyond that. And then their center depth can actually be what the Senators thought it was going to be, which is young, with Stuetzle, Norris, Pinto, and Mark Kastelik, all under 24 years old, 3 of them under 23. And it just feels like, it does kind of feel, though, that they're one injury away up front, because the depth up front isn't where it should be, I don't think, based on all of the high draft picks they've had. But they might have to just, take a step back and say, we got to let a couple of the kids play, like the Angus Crookshanks, the Igor Sokolovs, the Roby Yarventis. They've had all these high draft picks, but other than Ridley Gregg last year, none of them have really grabbed the bull by the horns and been like, hey, I'm going to produce at the NHL level day in and day out. So, Gil, that's where I think the Senators really need one more addition, which I'm sure we're going to get into. It's the depth up front. I'm not sure if that's up to par to be a playoff team, but their top 6 to me is plenty good enough. When you have I'll put Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stuetzle, and Claude Giroux as a top line up with the best in the league. Like, I really do believe that Tim Stuetzle is only scratching the surface. 90 points last year. Brady Tkachuk, I want to say I saw a stat the other day. Players with 80 points, 100 penalty minutes, and 100 hits in one season in the last 40 years, there's 2 guys to do it. Brady and Matthew Tkachuk. So they're just, unicorns as they are. And Claude Giroux, a future Hall of Famer in my mind, had a 79-point season. But it's what are they going to do behind that offensively to give those guys the support that they need to be a successful team?
So, I mean, there are still some rumors out there of some possible additional moves this offseason. What are you hearing, and what do you think is likely, if anything?
Well, I know they were talking with Vladimir Tarasenko's agent, new and old. We know Tarasenko replaced his agent about last week. And funny enough, Pat Brisson is also kind of in the news in Ottawa as well. That's who Tarasenko has decided to have represent him, because Jake Sanderson, Ottawa's young stud defenseman, just moved into his agency this summer. And people are wondering if, like Tim Stuetzle last year, if they could lock up one of their core pieces to maybe a team-friendly contract sooner rather than later. So I know Tarasenko's name has been thrown out there. I just don't understand. The Sens have $5 million in cap space right now, and they still have to sign Shane Pinto. So let's say if we're looking at the Noah Cates contract that was just signed as kind of an area that we could see Shane Pinto in, $2.5 to $2.8 million AAV. That's not leaving you that much. You've got about $3 million to play with. So I was looking, and we've been kind of talking more the trade route, where Ottawa would send a bit of money back and try to get, whether it's a Scott Lawton from Philadelphia or a Connor Garland from the Vancouver Canucks, these gritty middle 6 wingers. I think that's the type of player that Ottawa would like to complement some of the shooters that they have right now, and Kubalik adding another one. And then if you are going to stay the free agent route, Thomas Tatar is a name that's really interesting to me. Plus 41 last year, just a defensively responsible guy. He's not going to have to drive a line with Ottawa. He'll just have to be, a competent third line type winger. So I've been kind of pushing for Thomas Tatar as an option for the Senators. And then Pia Suter would be another one, where these aren't your sexy names. Like, Ottawa's got their core all locked in. The top 4 on defense looks great now with Chikrin Shabbat, Sanderson, Zub, and they've got a couple guys pushing. Tyler Kleven's a name I think fans are going to start to know more and more as this year goes along. But if they could get that third line supporting forward, preferably a winger, preferably a guy who's going to take a 1-year deal at under $3 million, I think the Sens should be all over it. If for no other reason, then you just can't have enough depth. Injuries are going to happen throughout the year, and you need these guys like a Thomas Tatar can be on a top line. He's going to be the third player on it, but he has the IQ to play with these smart players. So I just think they're going to need some depth, but can they find it on the waiver wire? Can they find it once the season starts? I think if you're Pierre Dorion, we've kind of been of the mind there's no excuses this year. Like, it's been 6 straight years out of the playoffs. The young core, the talent is there, but now it's like, okay, there's just no excuse. So I would do everything I can to have the depth that I don't need excuses, that I can just plug in guys when other injuries are bound to happen.
Well, we'll see what happens. Should be an interesting couple of months before training camp gets started. Ross, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, especially from that last answer, we just posted a clip, which we'll do sometimes from our episodes on YouTube, Locked On Senators. You can find the podcast 5 days a week. Well, now 3, actually. Now that we're in the deep summer, we're going to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes. One of my favorite parts of the show, too, is every Wednesday we'll have a different Senators fan on the show just to talk about how they became a Sens fan, their favorite memories, really tap into the nostalgia. So we're excited to have our Sens Central citizens back, and we're in the middle of interview season, so plenty of interviews and all that sort of thing you can find on YouTube and wherever you get your Locked On podcasts.
All right, Ross, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Gil. Looking forward to our next chat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think will hit the first home run. And no matter what Major League Baseball team you root for, you'll find great odds, props, and all kinds of other interesting bets on FanDuel. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.